I was talking to the owner of a small family-run ramen shop in a quiet Tokyo neighborhood last week. He was telling me about the last few elections. For years, he'd voted for the ruling party, hoping for stability. When his profits kept shrinking, he switched his vote to an opposition party, hoping for some kind of real change. But he said something that really stuck with me. He shrugged and said, "It doesn't matter. The face on the news changes, the posters on the street change, but the regulations that stop me from hiring another person are the same.
Wow.
The official announcements about fiscal discipline, while my ingredient costs go up, they're exactly the same." He wasn't angry in the way the Western news describes. He wasn't blaming foreigners or waving a flag. He was just tired.
Just worn down.
Exactly. He described it like watching a play where the lead actors keep getting replaced, but you slowly realize they're all reading from the exact same script written by someone you never see.
That's a powerful image.
And that's the real story behind Japan's recent political earthquake. It's not about the actors on stage anymore. It's that the audience is starting to wonder who is writing the script.
Okay, so let's really unpack this idea. Who is writing the script? That ramen shop owner, his frustration, it really points to something much bigger, doesn't it? A fundamental question about power in Japan.
Absolutely. Specifically, the power, the influence of the civil service, the bureaucracy.
Right. And it often feels, well, invisible. So for this deep dive, that's our mission. We want to peel back the layers, really investigate the history, the institutions. How did Japan's bureaucracy get so entrenched, so powerful?
And it's fascinating how that power, which seems so abstract, connects directly to everyday life. You know, like the ramen shop owner's struggles. We need to look at the economic side, too.
How does this structure maybe stifle innovation? Or contribute to deflation?
Exactly. We'll dig into those specific mechanisms, how this bureaucratic setup might be creating barriers, not just for big corporations, but for small businesses too. And yeah, the connection to deflation is key. Okay, and then we'll switch gears a bit. Because despite this image of a really traditional, maybe even controlled information landscape, digital media is starting to make waves, isn't it?
It is, but in a very specific, maybe uniquely Japanese way. It's not quite the same story as elsewhere.
So are people actually using things like social media, the internet, to challenge these scriptwriters?
Yeah.
To question the bureaucracy?
That's the big question. We'll compare Japan to other places, see what's really happening online. Is the audience finding new ways to talk back, or is it still largely business as usual?
You know, when you think about parliamentary democracies, places like the UK, Canada, maybe Germany, you generally picture the elected politicians as being firmly in the driver's seat.
And they have the standard model, They make the policies, they lead the government.
But Japan, it feels different. It's often described more like this incredibly well-oiled machine. But the engineers, the career civil servants, they seem to stick around much longer and maybe have more control than the drivers, the politicians who come and go.
That's a really good analogy. The engineers often outlast the drivers.
So the big question is, how did it get this way? How did Japan's civil service become such a dominant, such an entrenched force in how the country is run?
Well, if we zoom out, it really boils down to institutional development. How did the structures of government evolve over, decades, even centuries? Where does the power actually sit?
Right. How was the machine built?
Exactly. And Japan's system, when you really look at it, it's kind of unique compared to other big democracies. Think about the UK, for example.
Right.
That system leans heavily on what we call executive dominance.
Meaning the prime minister and the cabinet?
Primarily, yes. And core parts of the executive, like entrepreneury, they directly shape performance targets for government departments. Plus, a lot of UK public administration is based on convention, tradition, unwritten rules, not always hard statutes. Then you have the U.S., with its really strong separation of powers. Congress there can, and often does, initiate major legislation setting the rules for government performance, like the Government Performance and Results Act that came from Congress.
Right. A different balance. So where does Japan fit?
Japan is interesting. Structurally, it kind of sits somewhere in the middle. But in practice, it often acts much closer to that UK executive-led model.
How so?
A really telling example is the Government Policy Evaluation Act, the GPEA. It came into force back in 2002.
Okay, GPEA. What does it do?
This wasn't just some minor rule change. It's fundamental. It dictates how every single government ministry, every agency, has to systematically measure and report on how effective their policies are, their programs, everything.
It's about accountability, measuring results.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part, the part that really signals where the power lies. This whole comprehensive law, It was initiated by the executive branch.
Not by the politicians in the parliament.
No. It came from within the administration, the prime minister's cabinet, the bureaucracy itself. Not from the elected members of the Kokai, the legislature.
Ah. So the administration wrote the rules for how it should be judged.
Precisely. It immediately tells you that when it comes to defining what success looks like, how policies get evaluated, and ultimately how they're shaped and implemented. The rule book is largely written from inside the administrative state, not imposed by politicians from the outside.
So, okay, let me see if I've got this. The politicians might stand up and say, we need to boost economic growth or improve education. Big, broad goals.
Right, the headlines.
But the actual how, the nitty-gritty details, the metrics used to measure success, the definitions, that's mostly filled in by the bureaucrats.
That's largely how it works, yes. They handle the fine print, the implementation details.
Which brings us to the Kokai, Japan's parliament. You often hear it described as, well, a bit of a rubber stamp, just approving what the bureaucracy puts in front of it.
That's the common perception, definitely.
Is that fair, though? Is it really that simple? Or is there something more complex going on behind the scenes? Maybe a different kind of power dynamic?
That's a great question, and it hits right at the heart of democratic accountability. Where does the real power lie? And well, yeah, the rubber stamp label sticks. When you dig into the research, the Kokai actually has some surprising strengths, real influence in the legislative process. It's definitely not as weak as, say, the UK Parliament in some key ways.
Really? How so?
Well, for one thing, the Kokai has this deeply embedded, quite sophisticated committee structure, standing committees.
Okay.
And unlike in many other countries, these committees are staffed with MPs who often have incredible levels of expertise. They might spend their whole careers focusing on specific policy areas, agriculture, finance, whatever.
So they actually know their stuff.
They really do.
Yeah.
And that allows these committees to exert more formal leverage than you might expect. They can ask tough questions, demand changes.
Interesting. What else?
And remember how we said the UK system is largely based on convention?
Yeah, unwritten rules.
Japan's public administration system is different. It's explicitly legislatively based. The powers, the responsibilities, even how the bureaucracy operates day to day, it's all laid out in specific laws passed by the Kokai.
So the parliament has more formal hooks, legally speaking.
Exactly. More statutory power to scrutinize, to influence policy, to hold the bureaucracy accountable through legislation. And we actually have data that backs this up.
Yeah.
If you look back at the period between, say, 1970 and 1987, government legislation proposed in the Kokai actually faced a significantly higher failure rate than similar legislation in the UK Parliament during the same time.
Wow. Really? Even though the LDP, the ruling party, was dominant for most of that time.
Yes. Even with the LDP's long-standing dominance, that higher failure rate suggests that even with a strong ruling party, the civil service, working through its legislative influence, engaging with these expert committees, it has this profound, maybe understated ability to shape, amend, or even sometimes block legislation it doesn't like.
So it's not just passively stamping things.
Not at all. It's much more interactive. Let's go back to that play analogy you mentioned earlier.
Okay, the actors and the script.
Right. Think of the elected politicians as the actors on stage. They get the headlines, they make the big speeches, they're the faces everyone sees, they perform for the public.
Got it.
But the stage managers, the set designers, that's the bureaucracy. They're working quietly, backstage. They design the set, manage the props, make sure the lighting cues hit perfectly. They ensure the whole show runs exactly the way they designed it, often long before the actors even get their scripts.
So the bureaucrats control the production, even if the actors get the applause.
That's a good way to put it. The politicians might be the public face, but the bureaucrats are meticulously writing and implementing so much of the detailed script. They ensure continuity, consistency, no matter who's playing the lead role that year.
That image really helps clarify things. It explains how the Kokai can have these formal powers, these active committees, but still look like a rubber stamp sometimes.
Yeah.
Because the underlying bureaucratic machine is just so pervasive, so influential, so consistent.
Exactly. The deep structure shapes the performance.
Okay, that's fascinating. It suggests the whole dynamic isn't just, politicians versus bureaucrats in some constant battle. It sounds more complicated. Like there may be deeper alliances at play, things that keep the script consistent.
Precisely. You've hit on a crucial point. That conventional wisdom, the story of the prime minister always fighting these forces of resistance in the bureaucracy, it misses something really important.
Which is?
Strategic alliances. What the research actually shows is that influential senior members of the LDP, often the ones who've built reputations as policy experts, the Zokujian, they've formed these powerful long-term alliances with certain elements within the bureaucracy.
So not just fighting them, but working with them.
Yes. Sometimes called progressive elements within the ministries. It's not simple bureaucratic capture, it's more symbiotic. Key ministries involved often include the Ministry of Finance, the Monde controlling the budget and media, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, shaping industrial policy.
The big players.
The really big players. And these groups, the senior politicians and the key bureaucrats, they often find they actually see eye to eye on major issues, especially budgetary matters, long-term economic direction.
So they agree on the basic plot of the play, maybe.
That's a good way to think about it. Of course, there's still conflicts, turf wars happen, but their general alignment, particularly on fiscal policy, has been this incredibly significant unifying force. It ensures a consistent approach over time, regardless of who the prime minister is.
Can you give an example of how this works in practice?
A prime example, a really clear one, is Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, back in the early 2000s.
Right, Koizumi. Very popular reformer image.
Exactly. He was brilliant at navigating these dynamics. He used both the existing alliances and new administrative machinery that had been set up by reforms in the 90s. A key tool for him was the Cabinet's Council on Economic and Fiscal Policy, the CEFP.
CFP. Right.
It was set up just months before he took office, and he really ran with it. Koizumi was, in many ways, a political innovator. He didn't just accept the system, he tried to reshape it. He delegated huge amounts of authority for economic policy to people like Takanaka Heitze.
The economist.
Yes, a renowned academic, former government analyst. He gave Koizumi absolute loyalty and the intellectual firepower needed for the reform agenda.
Yeah.
And Koizumi himself. He was incredibly skilled politically.
How so?
He knew how to craft effective manifestos. He constantly dangled the threat of dissolving parliament to keep his own party, the LDP, in line. That's a powerful tool in Japanese politics. He also kept unusually tight control over cabinet appointments and personnel decisions, things that LDP factions used to dominate.
Taking power back from the party factions.
Right. And he had this amazing knack for delivering bold and decisive sounding sound bites, things that really cut through with the public. And crucially, he was a master at branding anyone who opposed his reforms as these forces of resistance.
Which we heard about earlier, that framing was effective.
Remarkably effective. It mobilized public support and isolated his opponents.
So how did the CEFP, this council, actually work? What made it so effective?
Its composition and its methods were key. It included 4 private members, usually highly respected economists, top business executives from big internationally focused sectors like cars and electronics.
Not just bureaucrats or politicians.
Exactly. And they weren't just there for show. They acted as a kind of vanguard. They'd put out these provocative and, importantly, unanimously signed private member papers.
Papers proposing reform.
Yes, well-researched proposals designed to shake things up, challenge the status quo. The CEFP also really pushed for transparency. They used public forums, disclosed information, trying to counter the bureaucracy's built-in information advantage, shining a spotlight, basically.
Keeping things out in the open.
And they pushed ministries hard, get specific timetables, set numerical targets for policies, force them to commit to measurable results. The CEFP didn't just propose ideas. It forced ministries to come back with concrete counteroffers, not just say no.
So they changed the dynamic.
It really did. After all the persuasion, the negotiation, Koizumi, the popular PM, would make the final call. And often, though not always, he sided with pushing reforms further.
Okay, Koizumi was effective. But what happened after he left? Did things revert back?
This is what's truly remarkable, and it really speaks to how deep these bureaucratic alliances and the reforms became. Even Koizumi's successors, who were often described, maybe a bit unkindly, as hapless and unlucky.
Abe's first term, Fukuda, Aso, that period.
Exactly. They mostly lacked Koizumi's communication skills, his unique political power, yet despite that, they still managed to preside over continued budgetary stringency. Fiscal discipline continued.
Really? Why? Just momentum.
It seems to be more than just momentum. It strongly suggests that the structural reforms Koizumi pushed through, combined with these deep bureaucratic alliances he either worked with or strengthened, they created a kind of inertia, a powerful undercurrent that transcended who was actually prime minister.
So the system itself kept things on track.
It appears so. For example, Fukuda, His father had been head of the budget bureau at the Ministry of Finance, so he naturally favored careful finance, protecting Social Security. Even Aso, who publicly questioned prioritizing balanced budgets, ended up keeping key fiscal hawks like Yusano Kaoru in powerful cabinet jobs.
Interesting. Maintaining continuity.
Incredible continuity. It shows these alliances and the institutional setup provided the strong underlying script for fiscal policy. It kept going even when the leader's style or specific leanings changed. They were, quite literally, riding on the coattails of a system shaped by these broader, deeper political bureaucratic alignments. Stability trumped radical change.
So it really does circle back to that ramen shop owner's feeling. The actors change, but the underlying script developed and kept going by these enduring alliances. It largely stays the same. The audience might want a new story, but the play just keeps running on its familiar tracks.
Right. And that ramen shop owner, he was feeling that script directly, wasn't he? Regulations stopping him from hiring, rising costs despite talk of fiscal discipline.
Exactly, the daily reality.
So when we talk about this entrenched bureaucratic power, this consistent script, how does it actually translate into economic policy? What are the real-world effects, like maybe stifling innovation or contributing to Japan's decades-long struggle with deflation? It sounds like, I don't know, an economic iron cage.
That's a good term for it, an iron cage. It leads us right into how economic policy can get seriously bogged down. Paradoxically, the system's focus on stability and control, on avoiding mistakes, it can end up preventing progress.
Imagine a super meticulous planner, really well-intentioned, but they're so focused on following every single procedure, sticking to the established rules, preventing any possible misstep, that they inadvertently create an environment where nobody feels they can actually build something new, or take a calculated risk, or deviate from the plan, even if the plan isn't working anymore.
Too much caution kills creativity.
Precisely. And research, especially detailed studies looking at Japanese companies, indicates something pretty counterintuitive: significant government intervention. It often tends to hinder technological innovation more than it helps.
Hinder. But isn't government support supposed to encourage R&D, subsidies, grants?
That's the intention, absolutely, the helping hand. But in practice, in a highly bureaucratized system, too much intervention can actually redirect companies' energy. Instead of focusing on genuine innovation, they might focus on what's called rent-seeking.
Rent-seeking? What does that mean exactly?
It means instead of pouring resources into risky, long-term, maybe groundbreaking projects like, developing a revolutionary AI or a new green technology.
The stuff that really drives growth.
Right. Instead of that, companies might find it easier or safer or just more profitable in the short term to spend their time and money navigating the bureaucracy, seeking political favors, lobbying for specific regulations or exemptions, exploiting the system for financial gain without actually creating new value.
So working the system instead of innovating within the market.
Exactly. It's about optimizing for political connections and regulatory loopholes rather than fundamental product development or market competition. And that diverts crucial resources, talent, money, attention away from genuine innovation. Plus, the pressure from political cycles, short-term policy goals, it pushes companies towards quick wins, not the long-term, patient investment needed for real breakthroughs.
They end up playing it safe, focusing on compliance.
Compliance and immediate returns, yes, rather than creativity and future growth potential.
So it's about optimizing for the rules, extracting value from the existing setup, rather than creating new value. That makes sense. But I heard something even more surprising. That a company's own internal rules, its own controls, can actually make this innovation problem worse, like a double whammy.
Yes, that's where it gets really fascinating and honestly a bit worrying. You'd normally think, okay, strong internal controls in a company, that's good, right?
Sure. Prevents fraud, ensures efficiency.
Exactly. They're meant to restrict managers acting in their own self-interest, make sure information flows properly, protect the company's assets, and often they do. But if those internal control systems become too strict, too rigid, imagine endless layers of approvals for everything, fixed procedures for every task, no room for deviation or initiative.
Bureaucracy inside the company itself.
Precisely. It can actively crush innovation. Employees lose their spontaneity, their willingness to experiment. Promising ideas get bogged down in lengthy approval processes, maybe miss the market window entirely. The very system designed to protect the company can end up strangling its future potential.
So the internal rules reinforce the external pressure.
That's the truly alarming part. High-quality internal control, when it becomes excessively rigid, doesn't just fail to offset the negative effects of government intervention, it can actually amplify them. It creates this double bondage situation.
Bondage.
Yeah. Enterprises face external pressure from the government, pushing them towards rent-seeking and short-term thinking. And then they face internal constraints from their own super strict systems, demanding rigid processes and discouraging risk.
It sounds impossible to innovate under those conditions.
It severely limits their capacity for genuine, high-risk, high-reward innovations. Like trying to run a marathon with your shoelaces tied together. And then someone else comes along and ties your hands behind your back, too. You're just not going to break any records.
No kidding.
So the research really points to a need for balance. Internal controls need flexibility, agility. You need to weigh the costs and benefits, not just create cumbersome, all-encompassing approval processes that inadvertently kill the very innovation needed for long-term survival and growth.
So for our ramen shop owner, it's not just the external regulations. Even if he wanted to radically change his business model, expand quickly, he might find himself bumping up against similar internal pressures, maybe societal expectations that discourage that kind of risk-taking.
It could absolutely play out that way. It's a kind of national mindset, perhaps, reflected at all levels, from the top ministries down to the smallest shop.
And this whole picture, it's not just about a lack of government spending, is it? It's about where the money goes, how it's managed, the environment it creates, which brings us back to deflation. Japan's been stuck with it for so long. Is this bureaucratic control, this policy paralysis, directly connected?
I think it is, but maybe not in the way people often assume. If we look at Japan's really severe fiscal situation, the debt, the deficits, and its struggle with deflation, it's not primarily because of, simple political failure or politicians just spending wildly.
It's more complex than that.
Much more complex. It really stems from these profound long-term pressures.
Yeah.
Demographics, first and foremost.
The aging population, shrinking workforce.
Exactly. Japan's population is aging rapidly. The workforce is shrinking. Projections are stark, maybe a 30% population drop by 2060. That fundamentally hits consumption, tax revenues, everything.
A huge structural headwind.
Massive. Then add the lingering effects of two enormous financial crises. The domestic one after the bubble burst in the early 90s.
With the lost decades.
And the global financial crisis in 2008-2009. These factors have put just immense sustained pressure on public finances. It makes escaping that deflationary trap incredibly difficult.
So the get and deficit problems,
Yeah.
they're not really from overspending.
Largely, no. They stem more from a catastrophic long-term decline in tax revenue because of the weak economy, the demographics. In fact, political leaders over the last decade or so have actually shown considerable restraint on overall spending levels.
Really, it contradicts the narrative sometimes.
It does. And they've also actively shifted spending away from traditional pork barrel stuff, like public works that benefit specific LDP constituencies, towards social welfare, healthcare, pensions, which is essential for the aging population, programmatic spending over distributive spending.
Okay, but it hasn't solved the deflation problem.
No, because the deflation itself, falling prices, and the slow economic growth just keep compounding the issue. It creates a vicious cycle. Deflation makes existing debt feel heavier in real terms. Consumers put off buying things expecting prices to fall further. Businesses delay investment.
A self-reinforcing spiral downwards.
Exactly. And this persistent stagnation has even started to erode the bureaucracy's own reputation. They were once seen as these brilliant economic managers in the post-war era, but the tools they used then don't seem to work as well in this new reality.
And what about the public? How do ordinary people feel about this? Does that play a role in the paralysis?
Hugely. Public sentiment is a massive, often underestimated factor. You see surveys where the vast majority of Japanese people say they want high social benefits. They believe the government should provide health care, pensions.
Okay, they want the services.
Yes, but there's this incredibly strong, persistent reluctance to accept tax increases to pay for them, especially increases in the consumption tax.
Why the resistance to the consumption tax specifically?
A lot of people, particularly poorer voters, fear they'll bear the brunt of the tax hike but won't see proportional benefits. They worry the money won't actually go to universal services but will get channeled elsewhere.
Is that fear justified?
Well, historically, there's some basis for it. There's evidence of what's called a particularistic bias in Japan's welfare system in the past, where revenues sometimes flowed to specific LDP client groups rather than being distributed broadly and equitably. So there's a legacy of distrust. People worry tax hikes will benefit certain groups, not everyone.
That makes the politics incredibly difficult.
It creates total gridlock.
Yeah.
You might have an elite consensus, policymakers, bureaucrats, leading politicians agreeing that, look, fiscally, we probably need to raise the consumption tax.
Right. The numbers seem to demand it.
But voters keep rejecting it at the ballot box. They punish parties that push for it. And Japan's political system itself, the bicameral parliament, with different electoral systems for each house. It often leads to divided government, making it even harder to pass controversial laws like tax hikes.
Policy stagnation built into the system.
Pretty much. And add one more factor. Japan is a net capital exporter. It invests more overseas than foreigners invest in Japan.
Okay. How does that matter?
It means there's less external pressure to reform. Unlike countries that rely heavily on foreign borrowing, Japan doesn't face the same kind of intense pressure from international markets or creditors demanding fiscal consolidation.
So the internal paralysis can just continue.
Exactly. That lack of external urgency allows the internal gridlock driven by demographics, past economic shocks, bureaucratic inertia, and public resistance to taxes to persist. It effectively traps the economy in this low-growth, deflationary state, even though everyone knows there are deep underlying problems.
Okay, so we have this deeply entrenched system, these significant economic challenges making people feel stuck, like our ramen shop owner. Logically, you'd think Japanese citizens would be desperate for new information sources, right? Ways to bypass the traditional channels, maybe challenge the status quo.
You would absolutely think that. The demand should be there.
So what role does digital media actually play? The internet, social media. How does it stack up against the traditional news outlets? Does it offer a real way for the audience to start scrutinizing those scriptwriters?
That's such a crucial question. How are people using these tools for political information? And the picture in Japan is, well, it's quite different from what you might expect, and certainly different from many other places.
Oh, so Japan has high internet use, right?
Extremely high. Internet penetration was already hitting 94% back in 2017, and it's only gone up. Social media use was also significant, around 51% then, so the access is definitely there. But political use of social media is significantly lower in Japan compared to nearby places like South Korea, Taiwan, even Singapore. You just don't see the same level of online political discussion, activism, or information seeking via platforms like X or Facebook as you do in those other countries.
That's surprising. Why would that be?
Well, part of it might relate to information literacy and fact-checking habits. The data here is pretty telling.
Okay.
One survey found only about 41% of Japanese respondents said they checked the primary source of online information. Only 41%.
That seems low. How does it compare?
It's much lower than the US, where it was 73%, or South Korea at 57%. And even fewer Japanese respondents, just 54%, said they check when information was posted online. Again, compare that to over 70% in both the US and South Korea.
Less critical engagement with online info.
It seems that way. And what's really striking is the awareness of concepts describing how digital spaces work. Take the term attention economy, the idea that platforms prioritize clicks and engagement over accuracy.
Right, getting you to stay on the site.
Exactly. Awareness of that term in Japan was incredibly low, just 5%. Compare that to 33% in the US or 40% in South Korea. And when they were actually tested, asked to identify disinformation from examples common in their country,
How do they do?
only 27% of Japanese respondents got it right. That's compared to 40% in the US, 33% in South Korea. So all these figures together, they paint a picture of maybe significant susceptibility to misinformation online and suggest a real need for more online literacy, more critical thinking skills about digital content.
It's a really curious paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one side, maybe this vulnerability to misinformation. But on the other, you hear the ruling party, the LDP, actually blaming social media for election losses, even pointing fingers at Russia.
Exactly. It's a fascinating contradiction. The LDP did publicly blame alleged Russian interference in social media for some election setbacks, especially around 2017.
Well, what kinds of claims were they making?
Things like suspended X accounts, formerly Twitter, supposedly linked to Russia, big warnings about shadowy threats trying to undermine Japan's stability, its democratic institutions.
Did they provide proof?
No specific concrete evidence was ever presented publicly by the government, which makes the whole narrative seem a bit, well, convenient, perhaps.
And ironic, you said.
Highly ironic when you consider that around the same time, the LDP actually helped re-elect a very prominent politician, Muneo Suzuki.
Suzuki. I know the name.
He's openly known for his extremely close, long-standing ties to Moscow. He regularly appeared on Russia's state-run Sputnik network. Some critics openly call him Russia's most loyal friend in Japan.
So the LDP blames Russia for interference while supporting a politician close to Moscow.
It does seem, let's say, inconsistent. It makes those accusations against Russia look less credible, more like political deflection, perhaps.
And what about the idea of regulating social media? Did that gain traction?
Here's another telling piece. Several high-profile LDP candidates who explicitly supported regulating social media, they were soundly defeated in recent elections.
Voters rejected them.
Yes. Take Kaizo Takemi, for example, prominent LDP figure. He openly called populist demands for tax relief irresponsible and suggested that SNS, social networking services, should be regulated to stop those kinds of views spreading.
How did voters react?
They seem to perceive these warnings about online disinformation not as genuine concerns, but more like thinly veiled attempts by the ruling party to shut down dissent, control the conversation, especially on sensitive economic topics like taxes.
So the audience could spot a script trying to silence them.
It appears so. Even if they weren't super active politically on social media themselves, they reacted strongly against perceived attempts to regulate online speech at the ballot box. It suggests a public that's wary of control, even if their own online political engagement is relatively low.
Okay, so if social media isn't the main place for political chat, and there's suspicion about regulating it, where do Japanese citizens get their news? And why do they seem to trust those sources so much more than in other places?
This really brings us to the unique power and position of conventional media in Japan. Japanese citizens place remarkably high trust in traditional outlets, TV, major newspapers, much more so than people in South Korea or Taiwan, for instance.
Why such high trust?
It largely boils down to the very specific centralized structure of Japan's media and its deeply ingrained image of political neutrality.
Centralized how?
Well, since before the war, really, 5 huge media conglomerates have dominated the landscape. Think Asahi Shimbun newspaper and Asahi TV, Yomiuri Shimbun and Nihon TV, often with cross-ownership between the TV station and the newspaper.
So a few big players control a lot.
A massive amount. These 5, plus the national public broadcaster NHK, they form what people call Japan's 6 media giants. And here's the key to their power. They're all part of these exclusive Keisha clubs, press clubs.
Keisha clubs, what are those?
They're essentially cartels that control access to government information and officials. They hold exclusive briefings, press conferences, and they often actively block freelance journalists or foreign reporters from getting that same direct access.
Wow, so they control the information flow right from the source.
It's an incredibly effective gatekeeping system. Imagine if only reporters from, say, the New York Times, Washington Post, and the major TV networks could attend White House briefings and everyone else was shut out. That's kind of how Keisha clubs operate. It gives these big 6 enormous, almost monopolistic control over the initial news narrative.
And how does that affect the style of reporting?
This insular system, combined with a very strong cultural reluctance within the media to report highly contentious or partisan information, leads them to consciously emphasize facts-based reporting.
Just the facts.
Mostly. They work hard to avoid exaggerating political differences. They strive for political neutrality almost to a fault sometimes. They don't really cater to specific ideological audiences like you see in the US or elsewhere.
No Fox News versus MSNBC equivalent?
Not really, no. Their guiding principle is fast and accurate reporting. Focus on consensus, avoid polarization. And this non-controversial approach has been reinforced by Japan's history. Decades of LDP dominance meant less need for sharply partisan news coverage.
So the news reflects the political stability.
To a large extent.
Yeah.
You'll often see TV news during elections focus more on the mechanics, who's running, how many seats, logistical details, rather than deep dives into ideological clashes or policy debates. And this whole approach, factual, neutral, non-controversial, contributes massively to why the public trusts them so much. They seem reliable, objective.
It sounds like an incredibly powerful, unified front, a carefully curated information environment. But even these giants, they must be feeling the pressure from online, surely. Is their grip still absolute?
Oh, they're definitely feeling the heat. Absolutely. While, yes, Japanese news consumers still overwhelmingly prefer TV and online news aggregators like Yahoo, news which mostly repackages traditional media content.
Right.
The traditional media landscape itself is changing. Slowly, maybe, but surely. You just have to look at newspaper circulation numbers.
They're falling.
Plummeting. down over 5% in 2019, then another 7% drop in 2020. That trend is undeniable. It's forcing the big six to adapt, to figure out their digital strategy, even if they're sometimes a bit reluctant about it.
So how are they adapting, moving online?
Yes, but in a very controlled way. The major papers now all have online content. Some are cautiously using social media, like Asahi using the Line app for daily bulletins, or the Nikkei business paper using X, formerly Twitter, to tease exclusive interviews. Even NHK started live streaming online in 2020.
So the shift online is happening, but it's the old players leading it.
Exactly. The transition to online news in Japan is largely happening within the control of these established media giants, or through those neutral aggregators like Yahoo, news that just compiles stories from those same giants. They're trying to manage the online space, maintain their influence, not let new, independent voices challenge their authority too much.
That's the key difference then, compared to somewhere like South Korea or Taiwan.
Precisely. In those countries, you had highly polarized traditional media that people grew to distrust. They felt the mainstream news was biased, not telling the whole story.
Which pushed people to social media.
Exactly. People actively turned to social media looking for unfiltered news, alternative perspectives, because they didn't trust the traditional outlets. But in Japan, because the traditional media is so widely trusted, seen as factual and neutral, even with the Keisha Club issues, there just isn't the same strong push for people to seek out political news or challenge the status quo on social media.
The need isn't perceived in the same way.
Right. For most Japanese citizens, social media is still mainly for hobbies, entertainment, friends, personal stuff, not really for deep political engagement or critical fact-checking or trying to uncover some hidden truth about the system.
It's like you have a really smooth, reliable highway that always gets you where you need to go.
Yeah.
You don't feel much need to go exploring the bumpy, maybe unreliable back roads for your serious travel.
Right, that's a perfect analogy. The highway is trusted, it works well enough for most people's information needs, so the messy back roads of political social media remain largely unexplored territory for serious news consumption. So what we've really seen here is this complex interplay, isn't it? You've got this deep-seated bureaucratic power, almost institutionalized. Then you have economic stagnation, which is profoundly influenced by those very institutional designs that can stifle innovation.
Right, the iron cage effect.
Exactly. And layered on top of that is this unique media environment where the traditional sources, the big six, still hold incredible sway. They've delayed the kind of disruptive influence social media has had elsewhere.
It creates a system that seems to prioritize stability, continuity.
And that elite consensus, almost above all else. For better or worse, even when the public, like that ramen shop owner, is feeling restless, frustrated by their daily economic reality.
And his observation, that powerful image of the same script, it really does capture it all, doesn't it? It's this compelling story of these powerful, persistent forces, the bureaucracy, the alliances, the trusted media shaping the decisions that affect everyone's lives, ensuring that continuity, that stability, even as the faces on the news keep changing.
It really makes you think maybe the script is more powerful, more enduring than any single actor who happens to be delivering the lines at any given moment.